I'm Chloe Miller, and at 35, I thought I'd finally earned peace. Until my family tried to take everything from me. After my grandmother passed, she left me her entire estate, millions in assets, a historic coastal home, and heirlooms dating back generations. But just weeks before final distribution, my mother called an urgent family meeting. I showed up expecting pressure. What I got was betrayal in a folder and a plan to strip me of everything. What I did next? They never saw it coming. Before I share it all, drop a comment with where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever had to stand your ground against the people closest to you. To really understand what went down, we have to go back a bit. My grandmother, Genevieve, my dad's mother, passed away about 18 months ago. She was my rock, the one person in my family who truly, genuinely understood me. While my parents were busy doting on my younger brother, Lucas, Grandma Genevieve took me under her wing. She saw something in me that they just completely overlooked. "You have a head for numbers and a strength they don't see," she'd tell me during our weekend visits when I was just 12. "They're so busy looking at what Lucas needs that they don't see what you have to offer." Grandma Genevieve taught me about financial independence and self-respect. She was a force of nature herself, a widow who had managed her late husband's manufacturing business for 20 years after his death. Instead of sports games and movies that my parents took Lucas to, she took me to her investment advisor's office. She sat me down and taught me how to read financial statements, breaking down complex concepts into terms a teenager could grasp. When I turned 16, she helped me open my very first investment account with money I'd earned tutoring classmates. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And she'd always say, "Financial independence is freedom. Learn to manage money and you'll never be at anyone's mercy." I took her lessons to heart, seriously, to heart. I majored in finance at the University of Washington, then went on to get my MBA and all my financial advisor certifications. My career was built on the foundation she helped me lay. Meanwhile, Lucas, bless his heart, was the golden child. 2 years younger than me, he was the charming son who, in my parents' eyes, could do no wrong. My childhood was a constant lesson in understanding my role, the responsible, level-headed daughter who never caused trouble. When I brought home a report card with straight A's, it would be acknowledged with a curt nod. "You don't need the praise, Chloe," my mother, Susan, would say, sometimes with a slight edge in her voice. "You're naturally good at school." But when Lucas, miraculously, managed to pull off C's instead of D's, there would be full-blown celebrations, rewards, and a torrent of praise. "Lucas has to work harder," she'd explain, as if that justified the disparity. This warped logic extended to everything. I didn't need attention because I was self-sufficient. Lucas, on the other hand, needed constant support because he struggled. It felt like a deep, unspoken expectation that I would always be the one to clean up everyone else's messes. Lucas dropped out of 3 different colleges before my parents finally threw in the towel on paying tuition. But that didn't stop them. Oh no. Instead, they funded a seemingly endless series of his business ventures. There was the sports bar that folded within 8 months, then an app development company that, shockingly, never developed a single viable product, and my personal favorite, a luxury car rental service that somehow managed to lose 6 figures before collapsing entirely. After each spectacular failure, there would inevitably be a family meeting. My parents would explain, with a collective sigh and a forced smile, how Lucas just needed one more chance, and how families should support each other. These meetings, without fail, ended with my parents restructuring family assets or taking out new loans against their property to bail Lucas out. My father, Robert, would get defensive when I dared to question these decisions. "Your brother has big dreams, Chloe," he'd declare, his voice a shield. "He's just had bad luck." My blood would boil. It wasn't luck. I knew it wasn't. It was pure incompetence combined with an astounding sense of entitlement. Lucas expected success without putting in the work, and rescue without facing any consequences. This pattern continued well into our 30s. I was building a successful financial advisory practice in downtown Seattle. I even got married to Daniel, a software developer who, bless his insightful soul, saw right through my family's dynamics from day one. We eventually divorced, not because of family drama, but because our careers pulled us in different directions. Through it all, I maintained my financial independence, just as Grandma Genevieve had taught me. Lucas, meanwhile, cycled through jobs, relationships, and money as if they were disposable commodities. By 34, he had 2 failed marriages, multiple credit card defaults, and a well-earned reputation in Seattle business circles as someone to meticulously avoid partnering with. When Grandma Genevieve became ill with cancer 3 years ago, I was the one who moved her into my guest room and coordinated her care. My parents visited occasionally, but Lucas? He showed up exactly twice. Both times, he asked her for money while she was literally on her deathbed. I remember one of her final lucid days. She held my hand, her once strong voice now frail, and told me something I would never, ever forget. "I've arranged things to protect you, Chloe," she whispered. "The bulk of my estate will come to you, not because I love you more, but because you're the only one who understands its value beyond just money." She made me promise to use the inheritance thoughtfully, to maintain the beautiful historic property on the Oregon coast, where 4 generations of our family had spent summers, to continue the charitable foundation she'd established, and to preserve the family heirlooms for future generations. "Your parents won't understand my decision," she warned, her eyes fixed on mine. "They'll try to convince you to share everything equally, regardless of the consequences. Stand firm." After she passed, the initial reading of the will went exactly as she predicted. My parents were absolutely stunned to learn that while they received some specific requests, and Lucas got a modest trust that could only be accessed for education or starting a legitimate business with trustee approval, I was the primary beneficiary. My mother, Susan, actually said to Arthur Jenkins, Grandma's attorney of 30 years, "There must be some mistake. Genevieve wouldn't have wanted to create division in the family like this." Arthur, a man of quiet authority, replied firmly, "Mrs. Miller, I assure you, Genevieve was quite clear about her wishes. She revised this will 3 times in her final year to ensure it precisely reflected her intentions. In the 18 months since, it had been a relentless, constant pressure campaign. Subtle comments at family dinners about what Grandma would have wanted. Emails with links to articles about siblings sharing inheritances equally. Pointed questions about when the estate would finally be settled. I had maintained my boundaries politely but firmly, honoring my promise to Grandma Genevieve. The Oregon coast property was being lovingly restored according to historical preservation standards. The investment portfolio remained intact, with the specified portions of earnings going to the foundation Grandma had established. The family heirlooms were being meticulously cataloged and insured. Just last week, Daniel called me. One of our occasional check-in conversations since the divorce. "How's the inheritance situation?" he'd asked, his voice laced with amusement. "Still getting pressure from the vultures?" "Daniel," I'd admonished him, though I couldn't help laughing. "They're still my family." "Family doesn't try to separate you from what's rightfully yours," he'd shot back, his tone serious. "Your grandmother knew exactly what she was doing. She was protecting her legacy from their mismanagement." After hanging up, I reflected on how incredibly right both Daniel and Grandma Genevieve had been. It all clicked into place the month before the family meeting. I'd started noticing little things, small inconsistencies in statements that somehow reached my parents. Questions they'd asked that revealed knowledge they shouldn't possess. Something wasn't right. And with this important family meeting looming, I knew I needed to find out what was really going on. That familiar knot of dread that had plagued me since childhood, whenever a family meeting was called, tightened in my stomach. Important meetings had always been code for, "Lucas needs something, and you need to help." The text from my mother, Susan, came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was just finishing up with a client at my financial advisory firm in downtown Seattle. "Family meeting this weekend. Important matters to discuss. Be at the house by 3 p.m. Saturday." No further explanation, no context. Just the usual Susan Miller command performance. My best friend since college, and now my business partner, Sophia, leaned against my office door frame. She could read my expressions better than anyone. "Another family emergency?" she asked. I sighed, showing her the text. "Want to bet it's about Lucas again?" "No bet," she laughed dryly. "What is it this time? Another failed business venture? Divorce number 3? Tax problems?" I rubbed my temples, feeling a headache begin to form. "I don't know, but it's important enough for a formal summons." What made this timing particularly suspicious was that it had been exactly 18 months since Grandma Genevieve had passed away, and the final distributions of her estate were scheduled for next month. That's when my parents suddenly wanted an important family meeting. "You know," Sophia said carefully later that day, "I've been hearing some things about Lucas through the grapevine." That immediately caught my attention. Sophia had connections everywhere. Cassandra at the investment firm mentioned seeing him at the Cascadia Bay Casino several times last month. "Lucas is gambling again?" I asked. A chill running through me. Sophia nodded. "Apparently, he's been there almost every night, and not at the small stakes tables." My stomach dropped. Lucas had struggled with gambling in his 20s, burning through a trust fund before our parents bailed him out. He'd supposedly gotten it under control, but addiction rarely just disappears. It just morphs, or hides, or waits. That evening, instead of preparing for my client meetings the next day, I found myself digging through old family financial documents. As both a financial advisor and, frankly, the only family member with any actual financial sense, I had copies of most of the important family papers. Grandma Genevieve had insisted on it. What I discovered in those financial records changed everything. It was like pulling a loose thread and watching the entire tapestry unravel. By the time I walked into that family meeting, I was 10 steps ahead of their plan to rob me blind. The day after receiving my mother's ominous text, I called Arthur Jenkins's office and scheduled an urgent appointment. Arthur had been my grandmother's attorney for decades and was serving as the executor of her estate. If anyone knew what was happening behind the scenes, it would be him. His office was in one of Seattle's historic buildings, all polished dark wood and heavy leather furniture that seemed to have been there since the firm was founded in the 1890s. Arthur, now in his 70s, with silver hair and sharp blue eyes, welcomed me with a concerned expression. "Chloe, I was actually about to call you," he said, after his secretary had brought us coffee. "There have been some unusual inquiries about your grandmother's estate." "From my parents?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. He nodded slowly. "Your father has requested copies of all account statements and property deeds. He claimed you had asked him to review everything before final distribution, which I absolutely did not," I clarified. "I assumed as much, which is why I didn't provide the documents," Arthur confirmed. He then opened a folder on his desk, its contents feeling heavy even from across the desk. "However, I've noticed some concerning account activity that I wanted to discuss with you." He slid records across the polished wood, showing me documents indicating that someone had attempted to access the investment accounts using a secondary password that had been established during Grandma Genevieve's illness. There were also inquiries, chillingly specific, to the Oregon Coast Property Management Company about appraisal values and potential selling procedures. "I don't understand," I said, my voice barely a whisper, though a cold, sinking feeling in my stomach suggested I did. Why would anyone be looking into selling the property? Grandma specifically wanted it kept in the family. Arthur looked uncomfortable, his gaze shifting slightly. "Your father mentioned something about family financial restructuring that would be more beneficial given current circumstances. He implied this was being discussed with all parties." "This is the first our hearing of it," I said, my voice tight, a cold dread creeping up my spine. "What current circumstances is he referring to?" Arthur hesitated, clearing his throat. "It's not my place to speculate, but he did mention significant family obligations that needed to be addressed before the inheritance distribution." "Lucas," I stated flatly, the name a bitter taste in my mouth. "This is about Lucas." Arthur didn't confirm or deny, maintaining his professional discretion, but his expression told me everything I needed to know. The slight tightening around his eyes, the almost imperceptible clench of his jaw. It screamed yes. I thanked him for his vigilance and asked him to continue preventing unauthorized access to the estate. My mind was already racing, piecing together the fragments. My next stop was the office of Paul Harrison, the family accountant who had managed both my parents' and Lucas's finances for years. Paul was a nervous man, prone to fidgeting, and considerably less discreet than Arthur. After I pressed him about recent activities, he practically crumbled. "Look, I'm caught in the middle here," he said nervously, straightening papers on his desk with trembling hands. "Your parents asked me not to discuss this with you until after your family meeting." "Paul, these are my grandmother's assets we're talking about," I pressed, my voice firm but controlled. I have a right to know if something's going on." He sighed heavily, defeat etched on his face. "Lucas is in trouble, Chloe. Serious trouble. Gambling debts." "I guessed," I said, my voice flat. "How much?" Paul looked surprised, as if he didn't expect me to be so aware. "Over $300,000 to some very unpleasant creditors," he lowered his voice, glancing nervously at his office door. "People who don't just send collection notices, if you understand what I mean." The amount staggered me. $300,000. It was horrifying. "And let me guess," I continued, the cold dread turning into a burning anger. "My parents want to use my inheritance to bail him out again?" Paul's uncomfortable expression confirmed it. "They've asked me to prepare financial projections for using the most liquid assets from the estate to clear his debts immediately after distribution." "Which assets exactly?" I demanded, leaning forward. He reluctantly showed me their plan. It was meticulously laid out. A blueprint for destruction, liquidate the entire investment portfolio, take a massive mortgage against the Oregon coast property, and sell the most valuable pieces of the jewelry collection. Essentially, they planned to dismantle everything Grandma Genevieve had specifically wanted preserved. "Have they done this before?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, a new sickening thought forming in my mind. "Used family assets to pay off Lucas's debts without telling me?" Paul looked even more uncomfortable, sweat beading on his forehead. "Your parents refinanced their home twice to cover Lucas's previous gambling losses," he confessed, barely audible. "And 3 years ago, they sold some of your grandfather's coin collection that was supposed to be held in trust for both you and Lucas." My jaw clenched. That collection had been promised to us since childhood. I had never received my portion and had simply assumed it was still in storage, tucked away safely. It had been sold right out from under my nose. The betrayal was a punch to the gut. After leaving Paul's office, a cold fury propelling me, I went straight to my parents' house. I knew they'd be out at their weekly bridge game, a sacred ritual for them. I still had a key from when I used to check on the place during their winter trips to Arizona. What I was about to do wasn't strictly ethical, but I needed to know the absolute truth. I needed irrefutable proof of their treachery. In my father's home office, a space usually off-limits to me unless I was being reprimanded or lectured, I found what I was looking for. Folders, labeled Family Trust Restructuring. They contained draft documents for a brand new family trust that would consolidate all of Grandma Genevieve's assets under my parents' control, with them as trustees. Another folder held a series of emails between my father, Robert, and a different attorney, not Arthur Jenkins, discussing how to challenge certain provisions of Grandma's will if necessary. They were already strategizing to undermine her wishes, just as Grandma had warned. But the most damning thing was an email exchange between my parents themselves, outlining their strategy. "Chloe will resist at first," my mother had written, her words chillingly precise. "But once we explain Lucas's situation, she'll come around. She always does." My father's response was even more revealing. "If she doesn't, we can proceed with Plan B. The important thing is getting access to those assets before Lucas's creditors take more drastic action. Once everything's in the family trust, we can distribute as needed." It was all there, in black and white. They were planning to use emotional manipulation to get me to hand over my inheritance. And if that didn't work, they had a Plan B that involved legal maneuvers to seize control. My hands trembled as I photographed the crucial documents with my phone. The click of the camera a harsh sound in the quiet house. I carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, leaving no trace of my intrusion. As I drove home, the Seattle evening traffic a blur outside my window, I mentally cataloged what was at stake. The Oregon coast property that had been in our family for 4 generations, the meticulously built stock portfolio worth nearly $2 million that Grandma Genevieve had cultivated over decades, and the jewelry collection, a treasure trove that included pieces from the 1890s that had been passed down through the women in our family. All of it, everything, would be liquidated to pay off Lucas's gambling debts if my parents had their way. And once those assets were gone, they would be gone forever. The family legacy Grandma Genevieve had entrusted to me, that sacred trust, would simply disappear. By the time I reached my condo, the initial hurt and betrayal had given way to a cold, steely determination. They thought I was the same passive daughter who would sacrifice everything for family harmony. They had no idea who they were dealing with now. The complacent, compliant Chloe was gone. In her place was someone who had finally learned to stand firm. The morning after discovering my parents' horrifying plan, I contacted Laura Davies, a trust attorney I knew through professional circles. Laura specialized in asset protection and had a formidable reputation for creative but impeccably legal strategies. Her office was sleek and modern, all glass and minimalist art, a sharp contrast to Arthur Jenkins's traditional space, reflecting her contemporary, aggressive approach to wealth protection. "Let me make sure I understand," Laura said, her expression hardening as I explained the situation, her pen poised over a legal pad. "Your grandmother left you these assets in her will. The estate is in final probate, and your parents are planning to pressure you into putting everything into a family trust they control, so they can use it to pay your brother's gambling debts." "That's exactly right," I confirmed, my voice tight. "And they have a plan B that seems to involve challenging the will if I don't cooperate." Laura's eyes narrowed. "They don't have legal grounds to challenge a properly executed will simply because they don't like the distribution," she stated confidently. "But they could potentially cause delays and complications, especially if they're willing to make false claims." She looked at me expectantly. "What are my options?" I asked, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. "The strongest approach would be creating an irrevocable trust before they can act," she explained, her voice calm and authoritative. "Once assets are in an irrevocable trust with you as both grantor and beneficiary, they're protected from exactly this kind of family pressure. Your parents would have no legal means to access them." "How quickly can we set that up?" I asked, a glimmer of hope sparking within me. Laura checked her calendar, her fingers flying across the screen. "I can have the documentation ready by tomorrow afternoon," she said, her gaze fixed on me. "But we'll need to move fast to transfer the assets before your family meeting. When is it scheduled?" "Saturday at 3 p.m. That gives us 3 days," she calculated. "It's tight but doable." She began taking detailed notes, her pen scratching rapidly across the page. "A whirlwind of activity already swirling around us. We'll need to contact Arthur Jenkins immediately to coordinate." What followed was a blur of high-stakes legal maneuvering. Laura drafted the complex trust documents, her team working late into the night. Simultaneously, I worked with Arthur Jenkins to prepare for the asset transfers. The process was incredibly complex, requiring different approaches for each type of asset. For the investment portfolio, we needed to establish entirely new accounts in the name of the trust and execute transfer instructions with precision and speed. For the Oregon Coast property, we needed to prepare and file a new deed, ensuring the legal transfer of ownership to the trust. And for the jewelry collection and other physical heirlooms, we needed to meticulously document their transfer to the trust's ownership, ensuring every piece was accounted for. It was a race against time. Thursday evening, I was at Laura's office, the air thick with the smell of fresh paper and printer ink, signing the final trust documents when my phone rang. My mother's name flashed ominously on the screen. "Don't answer," Laura advised, sliding yet another document toward me for signature. I silenced the call, but moments later, a text appeared. "Why were you asking Paul about Lucas's finances? We agreed to discuss everything at the family meeting. Please don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." I showed Laura the message. "They know I'm on to them," I said, a cold certainty in my voice. "All the more reason to finish this tonight," she said firmly. By Friday afternoon, everything was in motion. The investment accounts had been successfully transferred to the trust. Arthur had pulled every string he had to expedite the property deed filing for the Oregon Coast house. The final and arguably riskiest step was retrieving the jewelry collection from the safety deposit box at my parents' bank. This wasn't just any bank. It was the one my family had used for generations, where the staff knew my parents well. If someone mentioned my visit to them, they might realize what I was doing, and the whole plan could unravel at the last minute. As the bank manager, a polite but overly observant woman named Mrs. Henderson, led me through the hushed, marble-lined lobby to the vault, my heart pounded like a drum against my ribs. The safety deposit box contained not just the invaluable jewelry, but also small, intimate family heirlooms that Grandma Genevieve had specifically wanted me to have. her mother's delicate silver compact, glinting in the dim light of the vault, the antique pocket watch that had belonged to her father, its intricate engravings a testament to time, and a collection of handwritten family recipes, bound in a worn leather cover, dating all the way back to the 1880s. As I opened the box and saw the familiar blue velvet jewelry pouches nestled inside, a wave of profound emotion washed over me. I carefully unwrapped the emerald necklace that Grandma had worn on special occasions, its deep green fire sparkling under the vault lights. I remembered the day she had placed it around my neck on my college graduation day. "This will be yours someday," she had said, her eyes twinkling, not just as jewelry, but as a reminder of the women in our family who made their own way. Now, here I was, ensuring that her wish, her legacy, would be honored and protected. I signed the necessary documentation to remove all items from the box, placed everything meticulously into my specially reinforced bag, and left the bank without incident, a sigh of relief escaping me only once I was outside. The last piece of the puzzle was in place. By Friday evening, I met with both Arthur and Laura to verify that all assets were securely held in the irrevocable trust. The timing had been absolutely perfect. Everything was officially transferred less than 24 hours before the dreaded family meeting. "Your grandmother would be proud," Arthur said, a rare, gentle smile crossing his usually formal features. "She always said you had a backbone of steel when it mattered." His words, coming from him, meant the world. What should I expect tomorrow? I asked them both, trying to prepare myself for the inevitable storm. "They'll be shocked, then angry," Laura predicted, her voice flat. "They might threaten legal action, but there's nothing they can actually do. The trust is ironclad." "Just remember," Arthur advised, his wise eyes fixed on mine, "keep your emotions in check, no matter what they say. The moment this becomes about family feelings rather than legal rights, they'll try to manipulate you." That night, I barely slept. My mind raced, rehearsing what I would say, how I would respond to their inevitable arguments, the accusations, the emotional blackmail. But by morning, a strange calm settled over me. I felt alert, focused, like a chess player who had anticipated her opponent's move several turns in advance. As I drove to my parents' suburban home that afternoon, the same route I'd taken countless times for countless family meetings, I thought about all the previous times I had acquiesced, simply to maintain a semblance of peace. All the times I had put Lucas's needs before my own, because it was expected, because that was my role. How utterly different this day would be. I parked in the familiar driveway of the colonial-style house where I'd grown up, noting that Lucas's brand-new, sleek Audi was already there. Apparently, his gambling debts hadn't affected his car choices. Taking a deep, fortifying breath, I gathered my documentation folder, my shield, my proof, my Declaration of Independence, and walked to the heavy oak door, ready for whatever came next. The heavy oak door of my childhood home swung open before I could even ring the bell. My mother, Susan, stood there in her powder blue cardigan and pearls, the picture of suburban maternal perfection. "Chloe, finally. Everyone's waiting in the living room," she said, her voice carrying that artificial cheerfulness she used when orchestrating one of her elaborate scenarios. She hugged me briefly, a perfunctory squeeze, the familiar scent of her Chanel No. 5 bringing back a flood of memories, not all of them pleasant. The living room was arranged like a stage set for a very important, very uncomfortable drama. My father, Robert, occupied his usual leather armchair, reading glasses perched on his nose as he reviewed some documents, a pretense of gravitas. Lucas slouched on the sofa, his expression a mix of anxiety and his characteristic sense of entitlement. He barely looked up when I entered, a sign of his simmering discomfort. "Drink?" my father offered, gesturing to the cocktail cart where he'd already prepared his standard Saturday scotch. "Just water, thanks," I replied, choosing the armchair furthest from Lucas, strategically positioning myself. I needed a clear head for what was coming. After a few minutes of my mother's forced small talk about neighborhood gossip and the weather, a deliberate attempt to lull me into complacency, my father cleared his throat, the traditional signal that the real meeting was about to begin. "Chloe, we've asked you here today to discuss an important family matter," he began, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he'd used throughout my childhood, a tone that used to make me shrink. "As you know, Family has always been our highest priority in this house. I nodded but said nothing, allowing him to continue his well-rehearsed preamble. We've faced challenges before, and we've always overcome them by supporting each other, he continued, glancing at my mother, who nodded encouragingly, playing her part perfectly. That's what families do. They stand together during difficult times. Robert, just tell her, my mother interjected, feigning impatience, a little theatrical sigh. Chloe understands family loyalty. My father adjusted his glasses, a ritualistic gesture. Your brother has experienced some financial setbacks recently. Lucas shifted uncomfortably on the sofa but remained silent, his gaze fixed on the carpet. The nature of these setbacks isn't important, my father pressed on, trying to gloss over the ugly truth. What matters is finding a solution that works for everyone. I think the nature of the setbacks is very important, I said quietly, cutting through his carefully constructed narrative. My mother shot me a warning look, a flash of irritation in her eyes, before jumping in. Lucas has had some gambling issues resurface, but he's getting help now, aren't you, Lucas? Lucas nodded without making eye contact, his voice a barely audible mumble. Yeah, I'm going to meetings and stuff. The immediate concern, my father pressed on, ignoring my interjection, is addressing certain financial obligations that have become rather urgent. You mean his gambling debts, I stated flatly, leaving no room for euphemisms. My father frowned at my directness, his jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. As I was saying, with your grandmother's estate finally being distributed next month, we've worked out an arrangement that makes the most sense for the family as a whole. He slid a folder across the coffee table toward me, its contents thick with papers. We're establishing a new family trust that will consolidate all of Genevieve's assets. Your mother and I will serve as trustees, ensuring everything is managed properly for everyone's benefit. The first priority, my mother added smoothly, her voice a syrupy calm, would be resolving Lucas's current situation, but ultimately everything would still be family property. It's what your grandmother would have wanted. I didn't touch the folder. I didn't even glance at it. Isn't it? My father continued, as if I hadn't spoken. Arthur Jenkins has been less than cooperative with our requests, which has been disappointing, but our attorney assures us this new arrangement is legally sound. We just need your signature on these documents. He pulled out a pen, a sleek silver one, and held it out to me expectantly, the gesture radiating a condescending certainty. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, as I made no move to take it. Lucas finally looked up, his expression darkening, a flicker of raw desperation in his eyes. Just sign the papers, Chloe, he snapped, his voice rough. Don't make this a bigger deal than it needs to be. Still, I said nothing, letting the silence hang, letting the tension build. Perhaps you don't understand the severity of the situation, my mother said, her voice taking on a sharp edge, the sweetness gone. Lucas owes some very dangerous people. This isn't just about money. How much? I asked, my voice calm, but my insides were churning. My parents exchanged uneasy glances, a silent battle playing out between them. My father finally admitted, his voice strained, $327,000, plus another $80,000 to the IRS, my mother added reluctantly, her eyes avoiding mine. And the loan from Uncle Frank, Lucas muttered, almost to himself. So over $400,000 in total, I summarized, my voice flat, almost clinical. What you plan to pay using my inheritance. The family's assets, my father corrected sharply, his face flushing. Genevieve's estate belongs to the family. Actually, it doesn't, I replied calmly, meeting his angry gaze without flinching. Grandma Genevieve was very specific about her wishes. The Oregon Coast property is to be preserved for future generations. The investment portfolio is to continue funding her foundation. The family heirlooms are to be protected, not sold. I recited Grandma's wishes, each word a stone in the wall I was building between us. Those were general sentiments, not legal requirements, my mother dismissed, waving a dismissive hand, her face a mask of exasperation. The will gives you technical ownership, but Genevieve always intended these assets to benefit the entire family. And bailing out Lucas's gambling debts benefits the family how, exactly? I asked. Raising an eyebrow, the sarcasm barely contained. Lucas slammed his hand on the coffee table, a sudden violent crash that made my mother jump. For God's sake, Chloe, They're trying to keep me from getting my legs broken, or worse. Is that what you want to see? A brother hurt because you're being selfish? His face was contorted with a mixture of fear and rage. His desperation laid bare. That's enough, Lucas, my father said sharply, though it wasn't clear whether he was addressing me or Lucas. He took a deep breath, clearly trying a different, more controlled approach. Chloe, we understand this isn't ideal, but it's temporary. Once Lucas gets back on his feet, the trust will still hold all the assets for everyone's future benefit. We've helped you plenty over the years, my mother added, her voice taking on a martyr-like tone, though we all knew that wasn't true. My help to them had always been expected, never given freely. Now it's your turn to help your brother. I looked at each of their faces, my father's stern, arrogant confidence, my mother's carefully constructed, manipulative concern, Lucas's desperate, entitled glare. They were so certain of how this would play out, so sure that I would eventually give in, as I always had before. They expected me to crumble, to sacrifice myself on the altar of family harmony. I think there's something you should know about grandmother's inheritance, I said finally, my voice calm and clear, cutting through the tense air. I paused, letting the words hang there, letting them anticipate the next blow. As of yesterday, I continued, meeting each of their gazes steadily, my voice gaining strength with every word. All assets from Grandma Genevieve's estate have been transferred to an irrevocable trust with me as both grantor and beneficiary. The Oregon Coast property, the investment portfolio, and all the family heirlooms are now legally protected. None of you can touch them. The silence that followed was absolute, breathtaking in its completeness. My mother's mouth opened and closed without a sound, like a fish out of water. My father's face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson, a vein throbbing in his temple. Lucas simply stared at me, his eyes wide, as if I'd suddenly started speaking a foreign language. They were utterly, completely blindsided. That's not possible, my father finally choked out, his voice hoarse with disbelief and anger. The estate is still in probate. Final probate, I corrected, my voice firm. Arthur expedited the last distributions at my request, and Laura Davies helped me establish the trust immediately afterward. Laura Davies, my mother repeated, her voice rising in incredulity. You went behind our backs to another attorney? Just like you went behind my back to another attorney to try to challenge Grandma's will, I countered, my voice flat, delivering my own punch. Yes, I know about Plan B. My father's expression confirmed everything, his eyes widening in shock and fury. You had no right to do this, he roared, finally finding his voice, his composure shattering. I had every right, I replied, standing my ground. They're my assets to protect. And that's exactly what Grandma Genevieve wanted me to do. Lucas suddenly sprang to his feet, his face contorted with pure, unadulterated rage. You selfish bitch! Do you have any idea what these people will do to me if I don't pay? Lucas! My mother gasped. Whether she was shocked by his language or the stark confirmation of the danger, I couldn't tell. You've always been like this, he continued, pacing erratically, his voice rising, venomous. Always thinking you're better than everyone, always judging me. The perfect daughter with her perfect career who never needed help from anyone. That's not true, I said, my voice cutting through his accusation. I worked for everything I have. The difference is that I don't expect others to bail me out when I make bad decisions. My mother rose from her armchair and came to sit beside me, attempting to take my hand in hers, her face a mask of syrupy sweetness. Her voice became soft, cajoling, the deceptive tone she had always used to get her way. Chloe, darling, I understand you're upset that we didn't discuss this with you earlier. That was our mistake. But surely you can see that Lucas's life is potentially in danger. As a family, we need to protect each other. I gently but firmly removed my hand from hers, breaking the physical connection, rejecting her manipulation. I agree that Lucas needs protection, I said, looking her directly in the eye. Protection from himself and from your enabling. This has to stop. You have no idea what you're talking about, my father interjected, his lawyer mode fully engaged now, his voice sharp and dismissive. Lucas has a disease. Addiction is an illness, not a choice. I know that, I replied, acknowledging the truth in his statement, but quickly moving to my point. And the appropriate response to illness is treatment. not financial bailouts that allow the behavior to continue. "We can fight this in court," my father threatened, his face a mask of grim determination. "You've violated the spirit of your grandmother's will." "No, I've honored it explicitly," I corrected, a small defiant smile touching my lips. "And you're welcome to challenge the trust in court, but Laura assures me it's ironclad. All you'll accomplish is spending more money on legal fees that could be better used solving the actual problem." Lucas had moved to the window, his back to us, shoulders rigid with tension. "Easy for you to say. You're not the one who will be dealing with Vinny and his guys." "Who exactly did you borrow from, Lucas?" I asked, my voice calm but insistent. He turned, his expression a mix of defiance and fear. "Does it matter? Money's money." "It matters if they're loan sharks or worse," I replied, the severity of the situation finally sinking in for him, despite his bravado. "That's not just gambling, that's getting involved with criminals." "Don't be so dramatic," my mother interjected, trying to dismiss the gravity of his words. "Lucas borrowed from some private lenders when the banks wouldn't help. It's not ideal, but it's not organized crime." The way she avoided my eyes, the slight quiver in her voice, told me she was lying. She knew exactly how dangerous this was. "This isn't getting us anywhere," my father said, his tactical mind clearly searching for a new angle, a way around my impenetrable defense. "Chloe, the trust may be irrevocable, but as the beneficiary, you can still direct distributions. You can choose to help your brother without dismantling the entire structure." "That's true," I acknowledged, conceding the technical point, "but I won't be doing that." "Then you're choosing to put property and money above your own brother's safety," my mother said, her voice hardening, laced with the bitter accusation. "I never thought you could be so cold." "I'm choosing to end a destructive pattern," I corrected her, my voice unwavering. "One that you and Dad have enabled for decades." "Don't you dare blame us for this," my father said, his voice rising, his face purpling with anger. "We've done everything possible to help both our children succeed." "No," I countered, standing up, gathering my purse, the decisive act. "You've done everything possible to protect Lucas from consequences, which is very different from helping him succeed." "If you walk out that door," my mother said, her voice trembling with what sounded like genuine emotion, or perhaps a masterful theatrical effect, "you're turning your back on this family." "I'm not turning my back on anyone," I replied, my voice steady, my resolve firm. "I'm just refusing to set myself on fire to keep everyone else warm." I turned, my hand already on the doorknob. "We'll contest the trust," my father called after me as I reached the doorway, his voice thick with unfulfilled threats. "We'll claim undue influence, mental incapacity on Genevieve's part. Anything we can. You'll be tied up in court for years." I turned back, my gaze sweeping over their angry, desperate faces. "One last time. And how exactly will that help Lucas with his immediate debt problem?" I asked, my voice cutting through the noise. "Because those private lenders don't typically wait for family court disputes to be resolved, do they?" That silenced him momentarily, the air thick with the unspoken truth of his empty threat. "This isn't over," Lucas said, his voice low and threatening, a last gasp of defiance. "You think you're so smart, but you have no idea what you're doing." I looked at each of them, these people who were supposed to be my support system, my foundation, but who had instead tried to manipulate and use me throughout my life. "I know exactly what I'm doing," I said quietly, the words filled with a newfound conviction. "For the first time, I'm honoring Grandma Genevieve's wishes and my own boundaries at the same time." As I walked to my car, the composure I had maintained throughout the confrontation finally cracked. I could hear Lucas shouting obscenities from the doorway, his voice raw with fury. My mother called my name repeatedly, her voice shifting from anger to pleading, a desperate, manipulative wail. My father remained silent, which was somehow more unsettling than their emotional outbursts. Once inside my car, the adrenaline began to recede, leaving me trembling. My hands shook as I gripped the steering wheel, and hot tears blurred my vision. I had anticipated their reactions logically, prepared for every argument, but the emotional reality of standing against my entire family, of severing those toxic ties, hit me with unexpected, overwhelming force. I drove to a nearby park, parked in a secluded spot near the towering fir trees. and finally allowed myself to cry. I cried for the family I wished I had, for the idealized version of unconditional love that never materialized. I cried for Grandma Genevieve, who had tried so hard to protect me, to give me the tools for independence. And I cried for Lucas, my brother, who might never find his way to recovery, trapped in a cycle he couldn't break, or wouldn't. It was a deep, cleansing cry, washing away years of unspoken resentment and suppressed anger. As I sat there, trying to collect myself, my phone rang, an unknown number. Thinking it might be Laura with updates, or perhaps Sophia checking in, I answered. "Hello, Chloe, it's David. David Miller, your uncle." It was my father's estranged brother, Uncle David, whom I hadn't seen in over 15 years, not since a family funeral back when I was in college. How did he even have my number? "Uncle David?" I said, confused. "Arthur Jenkins contacted me," he interrupted, his voice calm, steady, and kind. "He thought I might have information that could help you understand what's really going on with your parents and Lucas. We need to talk in person. There's more to this situation than you know." I met Uncle David the next morning at a quiet cafe downtown, a place with a comforting aroma of coffee and old books. I barely recognized him. The last time I'd seen him was at that distant family funeral. Now, in his late 60s, he had the same Miller family features as my father, but with deeper laugh lines around his eyes and a gentler, more compassionate gaze. "You look like Genevieve," he said as I sat down, a soft smile touching his lips. "She would be proud of what you did yesterday." "You know about that already?" I asked, surprised. He smiled wryly. "Robert called me in a rage last night. Apparently, I'm still his go-to when he needs to vent about family betrayals. Ironic, given our history." I vaguely remembered childhood whispers about Uncle David being cut off from the family after some unspecified business disagreement with my father. "Arthur said you have information about my parents and Lucas?" Uncle David nodded gravely, his expression serious. "Your parents aren't just trying to bail out Lucas this time," he revealed, his voice low. "They're trying to save themselves." Over the next hour, Uncle David unraveled a financial history I had never suspected. A devastating tapestry of mismanagement and denial. My parents, he explained, had been covering Lucas's gambling debts for over a decade, far longer and more extensively than I'd ever realized. What had started as paying off a few thousand in college had escalated to hundreds of thousands by the time Lucas was in his 30s. The first major crisis was 8 years ago, Uncle David explained. Leaning forward, his voice heavy with the weight of the past, Lucas owed almost $200,000 to some serious people. Your parents remortgaged their house and liquidated most of their retirement accounts to cover it. I had no idea, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper, the full horror of their sacrifice, and Lucas's bottomless need washing over me. "They were too proud to let anyone know, especially you," he said, a sad smile on his face. "Robert always resented how easily financial success came to you while Lucas struggled. He couldn't bear to admit his own failings, or Lucas's, to his perfect daughter." The next bombshell was even more shocking. My parents were essentially broke. Between Lucas's debts, a few bad investments of their own, and their unwavering determination to maintain appearances, they had depleted nearly all their assets. "The family home has 2 mortgages against it now," Uncle David revealed, his voice grim. "Robert's law practice has been losing money for years. Most of his clients moved to younger firms with more modern approaches. They've been living on credit cards and home equity lines, just barely staying afloat, while waiting for Genevieve's estate to solve everything." "But why didn't they just tell me the truth?" I asked, a fresh wave of grief and regret washing over me. I would have helped them, not with Lucas's gambling debts, but with their own financial situation. Uncle David smiled sadly. "Pride, Chloe, control. Robert has always needed to be the provider, the patriarch. Admitting financial failure, especially to his daughter who excels in finance, he simply couldn't do it." He then handed me a thick folder containing bank statements, property records, and loan documents. Evidence he had meticulously gathered over the years as he watched the family spiral from a distance. "Why are you showing me this now?" I asked, feeling the weight of the papers in my hand. "Because unlike Robert and Susan, I think Lucas can still be saved," he said, his expression hardening, his eyes filled with a flicker of steel. But only if the enabling stops completely. He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. And because Genevieve asked me to keep an eye on things if anything happened to her, she knew they might try to use her estate to bail everyone out one last time. Grandma Genevieve, always 10 steps ahead. Armed with this new, devastating understanding, I arranged another family meeting. This time, it was on my terms. At my condo, on neutral ground, with Arthur Jenkins and Laura Davies present. My parents arrived, looking defensive, their faces drawn and wary. Lucas came separately, looking utterly exhausted and utterly defeated. Before we begin, I said once everyone was seated, the tension in the room palpable. I want to make something clear. This meeting isn't about negotiating access to Grandma Genevieve's assets. The trust is established and will remain intact. I saw my father stiffen, ready to object, but my mother placed a restraining hand on his arm, a rare sign of her recognizing the futility of resistance. We're here to discuss how to actually solve the problems we're facing, I continued, my voice firm but calm, not just put a temporary financial bandage on them. I've spoken with Uncle David, I continued, looking directly at my parents, their faces paling. I know about the remortgaged house, the depleted retirement accounts, and the full extent of Lucas's debts over the years. My parents exchanged alarmed glances, their carefully constructed facade crumbling before my eyes. David had no right to share private family matters, my father began, his voice rising, indignant. Like you had no right to try to seize control of my inheritance, I countered, cutting him off, my voice sharp. We're past privacy concerns now. This is about survival, Lucas's literal safety, your financial security, and the preservation of Grandma Genevieve's legacy. I turned to my brother, who sat slumped on the sofa, seemingly smaller than I'd ever seen him. Lucas, I need you to be completely honest, I said, my voice gentle but firm. What's the full extent of your current debts, and who exactly do you owe? Lucas looked at our parents, who, for the first time, nodded resignedly, finally dropping the pretense. He took a shaky breath. Then, his voice hollow, detailed gambling debts totaling nearly $450,000, spread across casinos, credit cards, and yes, loan sharks with direct connections to organized crime in Seattle. They've given me until the end of the month, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. After that, they start taking collateral, which could be anything from breaking my legs to forcing me to do things for them to work off the debt. The chilling reality of his situation hung in the air. And your gambling addiction, I pressed. Are you genuinely seeking treatment? Lucas stared at his hands, twisting them nervously. I've been to 2 Gamblers Anonymous meetings, he confessed. It's harder than I thought it would be. Admitting I can't control it? His voice trailed off. I turned to my parents. And your financial situation, no more half-truths. With obvious reluctance, they confirmed what Uncle David had told me. They had less than $20,000 in savings, massive mortgage debt, and credit card balances that kept them awake at night. My father's law practice was barely covering its overhead. They had been counting on Genevieve's estate, hoping it would solve everything at once, like a magical financial cure-all. Here's what's going to happen, I said. After everyone had finally laid their cards on the table, the full ugly truth now exposed. I'm not going to dismantle Grandma Genevieve's legacy to enable more destructive behavior, but I'm also not going to abandon my family. I outlined a comprehensive 3-part plan, one I'd been meticulously crafting in my mind since Uncle David's revelations. First, Lucas would enter a residential treatment program for gambling addiction. This would be a comprehensive, long-term program, fully paid for from my personal savings, I clarified, emphasizing it would not touch Grandma Genevieve's trust, but his continued support would be contingent on his full participation in recovery. No more half-hearted efforts. Second, I would help my parents develop a realistic financial recovery plan. This would include difficult but necessary steps like possible downsizing their oversized family home, restructuring my father's struggling law practice, and legitimate debt consolidation. Again, I stated firmly, I would provide some personal financial assistance, separate from the trust, to help you stabilize. Third, we would address Lucas's debt strategically. We'll negotiate with legitimate creditors for payment plans, I explained, and work with appropriate authorities to handle the loan sharks. I would contribute to legitimate debt repayment, but only after Lucas's treatment was well underway, and only for documented debts. This is conditional assistance, I emphasized, my gaze sweeping across all three of them. I'm helping with recovery, not enabling continued destructive patterns. If anyone returns to old behaviors, the support stops immediately. You're in no position to dictate terms to us, my father began, his old defensiveness flaring up. But my mother interrupted him, her voice, for the first time, tired but clearer than I'd heard it in years. Robert, stop. Just stop. Chloe's right. We've been handling this all wrong for too long. Lucas looked up, surprise registering on his face at our mother's words. We've failed you, Lucas, she continued, tears finally forming in her eyes, blurring her vision. Not by refusing to pay your debts, but by always paying them, by never requiring you to face consequences. We enabled you. It was the first genuine moment I could ever remember witnessing between them. A crack in the carefully constructed facade of their lives, and it was profoundly moving. Over the next 3 hours, with Arthur and Laura's guidance, we hammered out every excruciating detail. My parents agreed to financial counseling and complete transparency about their finances. Lucas, looking pale but resolute, committed to the residential treatment program starting the following week. We established clear boundaries and expectations for everyone involved. It was raw, emotional, but it felt, for the first time, like real progress. As they prepared to leave, Lucas hung back, waiting until our parents had gone outside to retrieve their coats. I don't deserve your help, he said quietly, his gaze fixed on the floor, shame etched on his face. This isn't about deserving, I replied, my voice soft. It's about family helping each other in ways that actually promote healing, not harm. He nodded, a glimmer of understanding passing between us, perhaps for the first time in our adult lives. The following week, I drove Lucas to the treatment center, a respected facility nestled in the quiet green foothills outside Seattle. As we pulled up to the entrance, a modern, unassuming building surrounded by lush trees, he turned to me, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. I'm terrified, he admitted, his voice small, vulnerable. That's good, I told him, placing a reassuring hand on his arm. Fear means you're finally taking this seriously. It means you're seeing the reality of it. What if I fail again, he asked, his eyes wide with genuine anxiety. I considered this carefully, choosing my words. Then you'll have to find the courage to try again, but this time, you'll do it knowing that I'm supporting your recovery, not your addiction. There's a difference. As I watched him walk through those doors, a figure alone against the vastness of his challenge, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Hope. Not certainty, not a guarantee, but possibility. It was a beginning, a tentative, fragile beginning. 6 months later, I stood on the wide porch of the Oregon coast property, a gentle autumn breeze rustling through the leaves, watching them drift across the manicured lawn. Grandma Genevieve had always said fall was when the house looked its most beautiful, with the fiery red maple trees framing the classic white colonial structure against the rugged, distant mountains. The restoration was nearly complete, a labor of love and a testament to her vision. I'd honored Grandma's wishes by working meticulously with historical preservation experts to maintain the property's original character, while subtly updating the essential systems to modern standards. This weekend was my first time staying here since the work had been finished. A quiet, solitary retreat to process everything that had happened. My phone buzzed with a text from Sophia. "How's the solitude treating you? Ready for visitors yet?" I smiled as I replied, "Maybe next weekend. Still processing everything." And there was much to process. The past 6 months had been an intense, challenging journey of establishing new boundaries and painstakingly rebuilding relationships on healthier, more honest terms. Lucas had completed the full 90-day residential program, and he was now living in a transitional recovery house, diligently attending daily Gamblers Anonymous meetings. He had even secured a job at a local garden center, modest work compared to his previous grandiose business ventures, but it was steady, honest, and blessedly stress-free. Most importantly, he was, day by day, taking genuine responsibility for his recovery, one fragile step at a time. My parents had also made changes, though not without their usual resistance and a few backslides. They had finally, albeit reluctantly, sold the two-mortgage burden of the large family home, and moved to a comfortable, more manageable condo. My father had merged his struggling law practice with a younger, more dynamic firm, where he now worked reduced hours as an of-counsel attorney. A significant blow to his pride, but a necessary step for their financial stability. Their finances were still tight, a constant reminder of decades of poor decisions and Lucas's enabling, but they were no longer drowning in crippling debt. Our relationships remained fragile, easily strained, and there were still tense moments, old patterns that threatened to resurface if we weren't vigilant. But there was also a new, nascent honesty between us all. My parents had stopped pretending everything was perfect, and I, finally, had stopped expecting them to be different people. "You've changed them," Sophia had observed during our last lunch a week before. Standing firm actually forced them to grow. "They changed themselves when they ran out of alternatives," I had corrected her, thinking of Grandma Genevieve's quiet strength. I just refused to be the alternative this time. Now, sipping coffee on the porch that had witnessed 4 generations of family gatherings, I reflected on what this inheritance truly meant. Yes, there were the tangible material assets. The beautiful property, the robust investments, the precious heirlooms. But Grandma Genevieve had left me something far, far more valuable. The courage to establish boundaries, unwavering and strong, and the profound wisdom to recognize the crucial difference between genuinely helping someone and destructively enabling them. A car appeared on the long, winding driveway, unexpected but instantly recognizable, Daniel's familiar blue Subaru. We had been in more regular contact lately, our friendship rekindling now that the wounds of our divorce had finally healed, leaving only a gentle ache. "Hope you don't mind the surprise visit," he called as he got out of the car, stretching. "I was driving to Burlington for a conference and remembered you were here." "Perfect timing," I replied, genuinely pleased to see him, a warmth spreading through me. "Coffee is fresh." As we sat on the porch, talking for hours as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, I found myself sharing the full, unvarnished story of the past 6 months, something I hadn't done with anyone except Sophia. "I'm proud of you," Daniel said quietly when I finished, his gaze steady and warm. "I always knew you had this strength in you. Your grandmother saw it too." "Sometimes I still feel guilty," I admitted, a lingering shadow in my heart, like I should have done more, sooner. "You did what you could when you were ready," he said simply, his words a balm. "That's all anyone can do." Later that afternoon, as the last rays of sunlight filtered through the trees, I received an unexpected call from Lucas. "Just checking in," he said, his voice steadier, clearer than it had been in years, free of the frantic undertone of desperation. 6 months clean today." "That's wonderful, Lucas," I said, genuinely proud, a lump forming in my throat. "How are you feeling?" "Grateful, scared sometimes still, but mostly just present." He paused, and I could almost hear the quiet reflection in his voice. "I wanted to thank you, not just for the treatment, but for not giving up on me completely. You would have been justified if you had." "That's not what family does," I replied, my voice thick with emotion. "Real family holds each other accountable, but doesn't abandon each other." After we hung up, I felt a lightness, a shift in the air that hadn't been there before. I went to the library, Grandma Genevieve's favorite room in the house. I had preserved it exactly as she had kept it, with the rich leather-bound books filling the shelves, the warm scent of old paper and wood, and her worn reading chair by the window. From the desk drawer, a familiar, comforting ritual, I took out a small, intricately carved wooden box containing the emerald necklace she had promised me on my graduation day. As I opened it, a folded piece of paper, thin and delicate, fell out. A letter, in Grandma Genevieve's distinctive, elegant handwriting, a letter I had never seen before. "My dearest Chloe," it began, its words a whisper from the past. "If you're reading this, then you've taken possession of the Oregon Coast House and found this letter where I knew you would eventually look." My eyes blurred with tears as I read on, her voice echoing in my mind. "I want you to know that I left you these assets not just because you were the only one who would protect them, but because you were the only one who understood their true value beyond money. Family legacy isn't about property or jewels. It's about values that endure, courage, integrity, self-respect. You have all of these in abundance. There may come a time when Robert, Susan, and Lucas will try to claim what I've left you, she warned, her wisdom stretching across the veil of time. Stand firm, not out of selfishness, but because sometimes the greatest gift we can give others is to stop protecting them from the consequences of their own choices. My vision blurred. She had known. She had known all along. Whatever happens, remember that the most valuable inheritance I could give you isn't stored in bank vaults or property deeds. It's the strength I see in you, the strength to make difficult choices and to live with integrity, even when it's painful. All my love, Grandma Genevieve. Tears streamed down my face as I carefully refolded the letter. She had prepared me not just with assets, but with the profound wisdom and inner strength to protect them. That evening, I hosted a small, intimate dinner at the house. My parents, Lucas, Daniel, Sophia, and Uncle David. It was the first time we had all been together in this space since the confrontation 6 months ago. There were awkward moments, of course, and old tensions still hummed just beneath the surface. But there was also laughter, real, genuine laughter, and honest conversation. As we sat around the dining table that had hosted Miller family gatherings for generations, I realized that this imperfect, complicated, evolving relationship was also part of my inheritance. Not just the property and assets Grandma Genevieve had legally left me, but the family she had always hoped we could become. A family that, for the first time, was taking steps towards real connection, real accountability, real healing. Some inheritances aren't stored in bank vaults or property deeds. The most valuable things my grandmother left me were her courage and self-respect. And those are things nobody could ever take away. What would you have done in my situation? Would you have protected your inheritance or shared it with family despite their intentions? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story about standing up for yourself while balancing family loyalty, please like and subscribe for more real-life experiences. And remember, sometimes the most valuable inheritance isn't measured in dollars. It's measured in self-worth and courage. Thank you for watching, and may you find the strength to set boundaries in your own relationships when needed.